Duke Elias caught Clara's wrist before she could leave their wedding chamber. "I am still a man," he whispered. "Do you think I cannot satisfy you?" She heard no anger in the question, only the shame of a man taught to confuse dependence with worthlessness. Instead of answering, Clara knelt beside his wheelchair and removed a loose brass pin from the axle. It had been filed nearly through by hand. The same private forge mark appeared on replacement parts missing from Harcourt's floodgates. In 48 hours, the trustees would declare Elias incapable and place the estate under his cousin's control. Clara still had a paid engineering position waiting in Edinburgh, but 400 families lived below those weakened gates. And someone had turned the Duke's helplessness into a weapon. Clara Bennett entered her wedding supper beneath 300 candles and felt every guest measure the bargain she had made. Some studied the plain ivory gown she had chosen, without consulting a fashionable dressmaker. Others watched Duke Elias Harcourt guide his wheelchair toward the head of the long table. No one looked at them as newlyweds. They looked at a damaged duke, and the woman willing to accept what remained of him. Clara had endured such examinations in workshops, drawing rooms, and offices where men praised her steady hands before placing their names on her designs. She took her seat beside Elias without lowering her eyes. His cousin Julian stood before the first course had been cleared. He raised his glass with the easy confidence of a man who believed every room already belonged to him. "To Lady Clara," Julian said, "whose courage proves that even half a husband may secure a devoted wife." A few guests stared into their plates. Several laughed behind lifted glasses. The sound was restrained enough to preserve manners and cruel enough to leave no doubt. Clara turned toward Elias. His jaw tightened, and one hand closed around the polished rim of his wheel. He said nothing. The silence gave Julian permission to smile. Clara set down her fork with deliberate care. "My husband's injuries took the use of his legs," she said. "They did not divide his title, his mind, or his worth into fractions." The laughter died. Julian's smile narrowed, but he bowed as though she had merely improved his joke. Elias looked at Clara then, not with gratitude, but with the guarded suspicion she had seen since accepting his proposal. He believed she had defended him because a duchess protected the value of her new title. He had not yet understood that Clara protected boundaries because she knew the cost of allowing one insult to become a custom. The supper continued beneath a layer of strained civility. Clara noticed Julian speaking twice with Mr. Quote. Sloane, the estate engineer, near the servants' entrance. She also noticed a thin line of brass dust on Sloane's right cuff. It was the bright, fresh dust produced by filing rather than ordinary wear. When Elias shifted his weight near the end of the meal, his chair gave a faint metallic click. Clara heard it from 6 feet away. The left wheel dragged for half a turn before moving freely again. She leaned toward him. "Your axle needs to be examined?" "It was serviced this morning," Elias replied. "Then it should not sound like that." His expression cooled. "I have lived with this chair for 3 years, Lady Clara, and I spent 12 years building mechanisms that failed when men insisted they were sound." Julian appeared beside them before Elias could respond. "The Duke's strength varies," he said. "The chair merely reflects the pressure he places upon it." Clara looked at the wheel. Metal did not reflect humiliation, pride, or declining strength. It responded to weight, alignment, friction, and force. Julian was offering an emotional explanation for a mechanical fault. That choice interested her more than the insult had. After the final guests withdrew, Elias dismissed the footman who offered to push him upstairs. He maneuvered the chair himself, though each turn required more effort than the last. Clara walked beside him without touching the handles. She understood that assistance given without permission could feel like another form of command. At the door of the private chamber, the left wheel locked. Elias forced the rim forward. The axle groaned. "Stop," Clara said. "I can manage. The metal cannot." She crouched before he could object and pressed 2 fingers against the hub. The wheel shifted sideways by nearly a 1/4 inch. No properly fitted pin should have allowed that movement. Elias watched her remove a narrow drafting tool from the pocket hidden in her skirt. "You brought instruments to our wedding supper. I have never attended a gathering improved by leaving them behind." For the first time that evening, the corner of his mouth almost moved. The expression vanished when she asked him to transfer to the upholstered chair beside the fire. He did so using the strength of his arms, refusing her help even when the damaged wheel tilted beneath him. Clara waited until he was secure before lifting the axle cover. The brass retaining pin slid out with almost no resistance. One side had been reduced to a thin crescent. Elias stared at it. Where no? Clara held the pin near the lamp. Natural friction rounded an edge gradually and left a smooth surface. This cut was flat, directional, and crossed by fine parallel lines. Someone had fixed the pin in a vise and filed it down by hand. The remaining metal had been calculated to survive several hours before failing under ordinary use. Clara turned the pin and found a tiny mark stamped near its shoulder. A crown stood above 2 crossed hammers. She had seen the same symbol 3 weeks earlier on a delivery list from the Harcourt Waterworks. The ledger had recorded 24 replacement locking pins for the western floodgates. The estate workshop had received only 12. Elias followed her gaze. You recognize it? I recognize the contractor. Harcourt Mechanical Consortium supplies half the valley. Julian owns a controlling interest in it. Elias's face became unreadable. My cousin has managed the engineering contract since my accident. Does he also select the men who service this chair? Yes. The answer settled between them. Clara placed the damaged pin on the dressing table rather than returning it to the axle. Elias looked toward the connecting door between their rooms. The marriage settlement had given her separate quarters, separate funds, and the right to leave the estate whenever she chose. He had insisted on those terms before she arrived. She had believed the gesture proved respect. Now she wondered whether he had prepared an honourable escape because he expected every woman to use it. Elias spoke without looking at her. You need not invent duties to make this arrangement tolerable. I did not invent the file marks. That is not what I meant. Clara waited. He gripped the arm of the chair as if preparing for an impact no one else could see. I am still a man, he said quietly. Do you think I cannot satisfy you? The question did not sound like desire. It sounded like a verdict he had already heard from physicians. Relative. And women who withdrew their names after his accident. Clara did not offer pity. She held up the damaged pin. I think someone wants you to mistake sabotage for weakness. Elias's eyes lifted to hers. If you are right, why begin with my chair? Because every failure teaches you to surrender another decision. She placed the pin inside a small cloth pouch, and because a man declared incapable cannot order an audit of his own estate, the trustees were scheduled to meet in 48 hours. They would review Elias's health, his recent withdrawal from public business, and Julian's petition for temporary administrative control. Clara had read the notice before agreeing to the marriage. She had believed Elias needed a wife with legal standing beside him. She had not known someone was manufacturing evidence of his decline. Elias wheeled closer to the table. "What do you need?" "Every repair invoice for this chair." He nodded. "The workshop inventory." Another nod. "The floodgate maintenance ledger, and the names of everyone holding a key to the parts room." His hesitation lasted 1 second too long. "Julian controls those records. Then Julian controls the evidence that may remove you." Elias looked at the pouch in her hand. "Tomorrow morning. I will authorize your access." "Not tomorrow morning." Clara crossed to the bell pull. The damaged pin was designed to fail tonight. She summoned the night steward and ordered the wheelchair secured without repair. No one was to touch the axle. "Sweep the brass dust, or remove a tool from the chamber." The steward looked to Elias for confirmation. Elias looked at Clara. "Do exactly as the Duchess instructed." It was the first authority he granted her. It was not yet trust. Before dawn, Clara entered the estate workshop with the steward. A lamp, and her master gauge book locked beneath her arm. Rows of wheels, hingers, pump fittings, and gate parts lined the walls. The room smelled of oil, damp iron, and freshly cut brass. She found the maintenance cabinet unlocked. Inside, 12 spaces had been labelled for replacement floodgate pins. Only 4 pins remained. Clara measured the first. Its shoulder was too narrow by the same margin as the pin removed from Elias's chair. She measured the second and found the same defect. A shadow moved beyond the frosted glass of the workshop door. Someone had followed her from the house. Clara closed the gauge book before the handle began to turn. The workshop door opened. "And Mr.?" Sloane entered carrying no lamp. He stopped when he saw Clara beside the maintenance cabinet. "Your Grace," he said. "This room is unsafe before the men arrive." The unsafe objects appear to be inside the cabinet. Sloane's gaze moved to the gauge book beneath her arm. He recovered quickly and reached for the nearest floodgate pin. Clara closed the cabinet before his fingers touched it. "The contents will remain where I found them until they are recorded. I maintain this workshop. Then you can explain why the cabinet was unlocked." The night steward shifted behind her. Sloane glanced at him and changed his tone. "His Grace suffers when unfamiliar people disturb his equipment." Clara studied the engineer's cuffs. The brass dust she had noticed at supper was gone, but a bright thread remained trapped beneath one button. "You serviced the Duke's chair yesterday morning." "I supervised the work." "Who held the file?" His expression hardened. "No file was used." Clara opened the cloth pouch and showed him the damaged pin without allowing him to take it. Sloane leaned closer. "That is ordinary wear. Ordinary wear rounds the shoulder." She turned the cut surface toward the lamp. This was held steady while a tool moved in one direction. "You have been a duchess for less than a day. I was a mechanic before breakfast." The steward coughed into his fist to hide a sound that might have been amusement. Sloane stepped back. "If you accuse estate employees without proof, Julian Harcourt will hear of it." "He should." Clara asked the steward to seal the cabinet with wax from his own keyring. She wrote the time, location, and names of all 3 witnesses on a blank inventory sheet. Then she placed the 4 remaining pins in separate cloth packets and marked each one without altering its surface. Sloane watched every movement. "You behave as though a crime has occurred." "I behave as though evidence disappears when people are careless." When Clara returned to the house, Elias was waiting in the library in a narrow chair borrowed from a guest room. The seat offered little support, and its small wheels forced him to depend on a footman. He dismissed the servant as soon as Clara entered. "You were followed?" "Yes." "By whom, Mr. Sloane?" Elias gave no sign of surprise. Clara placed the sealed packets and her written inventory on the desk. 4 floodgate pins remain where 12 were recorded. Could the others have been installed? The ledger must answer that. He opened a drawer and removed a brass key bearing the Harcourt crest. This grants access to the estate records room. Does Julian possess another? He possesses keys to nearly everything. Then I need a witness each time I enter. Elias looked at the uncomfortable chair beneath him. You also need a husband who can move without being carried. Clara heard the bitterness but refused to reward it with false reassurance. You need a safe chair. She examined the damaged wheelchair after the servants brought it into the library. The frame itself was sound. The wheel hub had been widened by repeated movement after the pin began to fail. Replacing the pin alone would hide the sabotage, but leave Elias vulnerable to another collapse. Clara asked for hardwood, a hand drill, 2 steel washers, and the portable vise from the gardener's shed. The butler hesitated until Elias repeated the request. For the next 2 hours, Clara measured the axle, cut a temporary steel pin, and fitted a collar that prevented the wheel from sliding sideways. She added a secondary brake lever that Elias could control with his left hand. He watched without interruption. When she finished, he transferred into the chair and tested the wheels across the library. The left wheel held straight. He stopped beside the window and engaged the new brake. The chair remained still, without assistance. How long will it last? He asked. 3 days under ordinary use. And after that I will build the correct part, after I know who can enter the workshop without reporting to Julian. Elias released the brake and crossed the room again. The movement required no servant, no apology, and no one's permission. He looked down at the lever. You designed this before coming here. A version of it. For whom? For a railway clerk who lost one arm. Clara opened her gauge book, but did not hand it over. My late husband registered the first patent under his own name. Elias turned toward her. Did he design any part of it? He suggested the chair should be painted black. A silence followed. This marriage will not take your work from you, Elias said. That promise will matter when it costs you something. Before he could answer, a factory bell rang from the lower valley. 3 sharp strikes sounded, followed by 2. Clara recognized the pattern from the estate safety notices. Mechanical emergency, she said. Elias reached the library door before the butler entered. A messenger from the Eastern Mill had arrived on horseback. The main lifting platform had begun dropping under load. Mr. T. Sloane was already on his way. Clara closed her gauge book. Suangi. Elias looked toward the rain-dark road beyond the windows. The mill floor is no place for ceremony. Good. The Eastern Mill stood beside the river, its upper windows trembling with the movement of the looms. Workers had cleared the lifting platform, but 6 crates of dyed wool remained suspended above the floor. A chain groaned each time the load shifted. Sloane stood beside the control housing with Julian and the mill foreman. He turned when Clara entered. I told them to replace the drive chain. Clara listened to the mechanism. The chain struck evenly. The irregular sound came from beneath the platform. Lower the load, she said. Sloane shook his head. The brake will not hold. Because the load plate is reversed. The foreman stared at her. That plate has not been touched since winter. Clara pointed to the indicator arrow stamped near the lower bearing. It faced inward. where no operator could see it. Installed correctly. The arrow should have faced the inspection path. The reversed plate forced the braking teeth away from the drum each time weight increased. Sloane stepped between her and the housing. That conclusion is premature. The platform has dropped 4 inches. Clara marked its current height with chalk. Give me 6 men, 2 timber braces, and the unloading rope from the north crane. Julian smiled without warmth. You are prepared to risk workers on your first morning here. I am prepared to keep them out from beneath the load. Clara ordered the men to anchor the platform from both sides before anyone opened the housing. She assigned one worker to watch the chalk line, and another to call every change in height. Then she had the crates transferred one at a time through the upper loading doors. The platform dropped another inch after the 3rd crate, with the weight removed. Clara opened the control housing. The load plate had been reversed exactly as she predicted. Its bolts were newly polished. Someone had removed and replaced them within the past week. She turned the plate, reset the teeth, and asked the foreman to test the platform with sacks of scrap cloth. The lift completed 5 full cycles without dropping. More than 30 workers had gathered by then. The foreman removed his cap. That saved the main shipment. It also saved the men assigned to unload it. Julian rested a hand on Sloane's shoulder. Mister. Sloane's decision to halt operations prevented a tragedy. Clara looked at Elias. He had arrived behind them with the steward and now sat where every worker could see him. For one moment, she expected another silence. Then Elias spoke. Mister. Sloane proposed replacing a sound chain. His voice carried across the mill floor. The Duchess identified the reversed plate, organized the unloading, and restored the brake. Julian's hand fell from Sloane's shoulder. The workers looked at Clara differently, not as the young wife beside a damaged title. They looked at the person who had kept 6 crates and several tons of machinery from falling through their floor. Clara crouched beside the opened housing. Fresh brass filings clung to the oil beneath the load plate. She collected them in folded paper. The particles matched the colour and cut of the dust found inside Elias's wheel hub. A chair, a floodgate, and a mill lift had failed through alterations that competent maintenance should have prevented. This was no longer negligence. Someone was teaching every machine at Harcourt to brake on command. Across the mill, Julian watched Clara seal the filings and finally understood that she was not merely a bride. She was a threat. Julian did not challenge Clara on the mill floor. He waited until the workers had returned to their stations and the machinery drowned private conversation beneath its rhythm. Then he approached Elias beside the loading doors. You embarrassed your engineer before his own men. I corrected the record. You elevated your wife after one fortunate guess. Clara folded the paper containing the brass filings and sealed it with wax from the foreman's desk. The plate was reversed. The bolts were recently disturbed. And the chain you intended to replace was sound. Julian looked at her. You have mistaken a household courtesy for authority. Your Grace. No, Elias said. I gave her authority when I ordered the workshop opened. Julian's expression remained polite, but his eyes shifted toward the sealed evidence in Clara's hand. Then I hope you will accept responsibility when her interference delays the floodgate inspection. He walked away before Elias could answer. Clara watched him speak with Sloane near the yard gate. Sloane touched his right cuff, twice, then hurried toward the estate carriage. They are afraid of what you collected, Elias said. They are afraid I can explain it. That distinction matters to you. It should matter to anyone whose reputation has been used to hide another person's failure. Elias looked toward the workers who had gathered around the repaired lift. The foreman knew you were right before I spoke. The trustees will not care what a foreman believes unless his statement threatens someone important. You think my name should carry the truth for you. I think your name has carried weaker men for years. The answer struck him harder than Clara intended. She saw it in the way his hand tightened around the wheel rim. He did not retreat behind anger. What would you have me do? Learn enough to know when your authority is being borrowed. The journey back to Harcourt Hall took nearly an hour. Elias refused the covered carriage and travelled in the open landau where he could observe the mills and water channels below the reservoir. Clara sat opposite him, with the sealed filings in her lap. At each workshop gate, men stopped to look. Some bowed to the Duke. More of them looked at Clara. The story of the lifting platform had reached the estate before they did. When they entered the front hall, the butler handed Elias a written order from Julian. Until the trustees completed their review, Clara was forbidden to enter the main workshop, records room, gatehouse, or machinery stores without Julian's written permission. Elias read the order twice. He has no right to issue this. He believes he does. He is one trustee among 5. He is the only trustee living on the estate. And he controls the men who decide what reaches the others. Elias tore the order in half. Clara stopped him before he dropped the pieces. Do not destroy it. It is worthless. It proves he restricted my access less than an hour after I preserved evidence. She placed the pieces together on a side table and asked the butler to bring a blank envelope. Elias watched her seal the torn order inside it. You collect insults as carefully as machine parts. Both reveal how a system was designed. He authorized her access to the records room in writing and signed the order before 2 servants. Then he added a second instruction requiring every workshop key to be accounted for before sunset. Clara expected Julian to challenge him immediately. Instead, no one could find the key assigned to Sloane. The records room occupied a narrow chamber behind the estate office. Its shelves held rent rolls, mill accounts, repair contracts, labour, payments, and waterworks inspections dating back 20 years. Clara began with the wheelchair invoices. 16 brass pins had been purchased in 12 months. A properly hardened pin should have lasted years. 4 invoices described emergency replacements after incidents Elias barely remembered. Each had been approved by Sloane and paid through Julian's consortium. Clara compared the dates with Elias's correspondence. Before each chair failure, Elias had attempted to attend a trustees' meeting, inspect a mill, or question a repair expense. After each failure, he had cancelled the engagement and allowed Julian to represent him. Elias read the pattern over her shoulder. I believe the chair failed because I used it badly. A machine does not punish pride. I blamed myself because that was easier than accusing the man who had managed my life since the accident. Clara looked at him. That explanation does not excuse what you allowed at dinner. No. His answer came without defence. I heard Julian insult you. And I stayed silent because I thought speaking would confirm that I needed you to defend me. You did need me. Yes. He held her gaze. And you should not have needed to defend yourself alone. It was not yet an apology. It was the first honest measurement of the harm. Clara turned back to the accounts. The floodgate invoices followed the same pattern as the chair repairs. Parts were ordered repeatedly, billed at full price, and installed without independent inspection. 3 payments had been approved for western gate locking pins during weeks when the road to the reservoir was closed by landslides. The deliveries could not have reached Harcourt on the recorded dates. A light knock interrupted them. A young workshop apprentice stood outside with his cap crushed between both hands. His name was Thomas Reed. Clara remembered him from the mill yard. He glanced toward Elias, then lowered his voice. "Mister, Sloane told me to sharpen 6 gate pins last month." "Sharpen them how?" Clara asked. "He gave me a wooden pattern and said the shoulders were too thick." "Where is the pattern?" Sloane burned it after I finished. "Who saw you working?" "No one." "Your Grace." Thomas swallowed. He said the order came from the Duke. Elias moved closer. "It did not." The boy's face drained of colour. "If Mr. Sloane knows I spoke, my father loses his cottage." Clara closed the ledger. "You will not sign a statement today." Elias looked at her sharply. "His testimony could stop Julian. It could also destroy his family before we can protect them." She asked Thomas to describe the file. Visa, pattern, and room he had used. Then she wrote the details without including his name. "The truth does not become stronger because we sacrifice the weakest person holding it." Elias considered the boy. "Your father's tenancy will be transferred from Sloane's supervision before nightfall." Thomas looked between them. "Will he know why?" "No," Clara said. "He will know only that the Duke reviewed the cottage rolls." After the apprentice left, Elias signed the transfer himself. The act risked alerting Julian, but it removed the immediate threat against the witness. Clara noticed that he did not ask whether protecting Thomas would improve his position before the trustees. That mattered more than an apology offered safely. They worked until the lamps were lit. Clara reconstructed 12 months of false repairs and marked every payment that benefited Julian's consortium. Elias read each entry aloud so she could compare the handwriting without shifting between books. Their rhythm became natural. He noticed when her fingers stiffened and moved the ink closer before she asked. She noticed when the borrowed chair strained his shoulders and shortened each task without making the choice for him. Near midnight, the butler announced that Julian had summoned the senior servants to the morning room. A silver tool case rested on the table when Clara and Elias arrived. It belonged to Clara. The lock had been forced. Sloane stood beside Julian and 2 trustees who had reached Harcourt earlier than expected. Julian opened the case with a folded handkerchief. Inside lay one of the missing floodgate pins. Its shoulder had been freshly filed. Clara recognized the cut immediately. She also recognized something more dangerous. The pin carried a locking groove from a design that existed only inside her private master-gauge book. Julian looked at the trustees. "We found this in the Duchess's room." Then he turned to Elias. "Your wife did not discover the sabotage. She brought it into your house." Elias stared at the filed pin as though Julian had placed a weapon on the table. Clara did not move toward the tool case. "Who entered my room?" she asked. Julian folded his hands behind his back. "Mrs. Hale found the broken lock while delivering fresh towels." "Who touched the case before the trustees arrived?" "Mr. Palm." Sloane secured it. Then the evidence passed through the hands of the man whose missing key opened the workshop. Sloane's face reddened. "You cannot prove my key was used." "I did not say it was." Clara turned to the housekeeper standing near the door. "Mrs. Hale, was the case open when you entered?" The woman's eyes flicked toward Julian. "No." "Your Grace, was the lock already damaged? I saw a mark near the clasp." "A mark is not the same as a forced lock." Julian stepped between them. "You are frightening a servant to avoid a simple fact. The simple fact is that a metal pin appeared inside a locked case after my access was restricted. Clara looked at the trustees. That deserves examination before accusation. Sir Malcolm Avery, the oldest trustee, lifted the pin with a handkerchief. You agree this is a floodgate component. I agree it resembles one. And the filing deliberate. Julian gave a quiet sigh. Then we are discussing motive, not method. Elias finally spoke. What motive would Clara have control? Julian's answer came too quickly. She marries you as the trustees prepare to review your capacity, discovers sabotage no one else can verify, and then offers herself as the only person capable of saving the estate. Clara heard the structure beneath his claim. He had turned competence into ambition, access into guilt, and urgency into manipulation. The accusation was designed for men who already believed a capable woman must be seeking someone else's authority. Sir Malcolm studied Elias. Did the Duchess request control of the engineering accounts? She requested access. Did she remove items from the workshop? She preserved 4 altered pins in sealed packets. Sloane stepped forward. Only 3 packets remain. The room became still. Clara looked at him. Where are they? In the steward's safe. Then bring them. Julian shook his head. The safe was opened before dinner. 1 packet was missing. The night steward protested from the doorway. I sealed all 4 myself. And who ordered you to open the safe? Clara asked. The man looked toward Julian. Mr. Harcourt said. The trustees required the inventory. Julian did not deny it. The trustees do require evidence. Clara turned back to Elias. He had allowed Julian to control the room by answering each question separately instead of seeing the chain. She waited for him to recognize it. He looked at the broken tool case, the planted pin, and the gathered trustees. Then he said the words Julian needed. Until this is resolved, Clara should not enter the workshop alone. The sentence landed without force and did more damage because of it. Clara felt every servant in the room understand that the Duke had chosen caution over her word. She did not ask him to reconsider. She did not defend her loyalty, her marriage, or her intentions. Write the restriction, she said. Elias looked at her. Clara, if you are limiting my authority, place your name beneath the decision. Sir Malcolm shifted uncomfortably. Julian smiled. Elias asked for paper. He wrote that Clara could enter the workshop, gatehouse, records, room, and machinery stores only with a trustee or estate officer present. His hand paused above the signature line. Clara watched him sign. She folded the order and placed it inside her pocket. Now no one can pretend this injury was accidental. Elias flinched. Julian mistook her meaning and relaxed. Clara turned to Sir Malcolm. I request that my tool case, its lock, the pin, and every cloth or handkerchief used to touch them remain in this room under 2 independent seals. The trustee nodded. I also request written statements from Mrs. Harley, Mr. Sloane, the steward, and every person who entered this room before my arrival. Julian's smile faded. You are in no position to issue demands. I am the person you accused. She faced him fully. That gives me an interest in preserving what you may later wish had disappeared. Elias called the butler forward and ordered the room sealed. Julian objected. But Sir Malcolm supported the decision. No one left until each person had written the time they entered, what they touched, and whom they saw. Clara gave no explanation for why she insisted. The longer Julian believed the planted pin had trapped her, the less carefully he would protect the larger scheme. When the statements were complete, Clara returned to her room under the escort of Mrs. Palmer. The broken tool case remained behind. Her drafting case sat untouched beside the writing desk. She locked the door and examined it. The outer leather showed no damage. The brass corners were cold. The hidden base remained closed. Clara released the spring beneath the carrying handle and removed the Bennett master gauge book from its concealed compartment. Julian had searched the obvious case and planted evidence where a mechanic was expected to keep tools. He had not found the book containing the measurements that could destroy him. That should have comforted her. Instead, one detail from the planted pin unsettled her. She placed it in memory beside the drawings in the gauge book. The locking groove had not merely copied one of her completed designs. It included a narrow relief channel she had added in pencil after a failed workshop trial. The correction appeared on only one page. No patent office had seen it. No contractor had purchased it. Even her Edinburgh employers had received a simplified drawing without the channel. Someone had opened the master book or copied a page from it before Clara hid it beneath the drafting case. She reviewed every moment since arriving at Harcourt. The book had remained with her during the wedding supper, the night inspection, the mill repair, and the records audit. Only once had it left her sight. That morning, while Clara repaired Elias's chair in the library, she had placed the book on the desk and crossed the room to test the brake. Elias had been present. So had the butler, 2 footmen, and Julian for less than a minute. Julian had asked whether the repair would delay the trustees' review. He had rested one hand on the desk while speaking. Clara turned the gauge book sideways. A faint pressure mark crossed the page behind the hidden correction. Someone had placed thin paper over the drawing and traced it without removing the original sheet. The indentation captured more than the design. It captured a partial crest from the paper used above it. Clara held the page toward the lamp. A stag's antler and the edge of a crown appeared in the compressed fibres. Harcourt Estate stationery carried a lion. The trustees used a shield. Only Julian's private consortium used a crowned stag. Clara closed the book before Mrs. Hale knocked. Elias waited in the corridor. He had dismissed the servants and positioned his chair several feet from her door. "I should not have signed that order," he said. "You believed the accusation might be true. I believed restricting you would make the trustees listen while I investigated. You preserved their comfort by spending my standing." His face tightened. "Yes." Clara opened the door but did not invite him inside. "You remained silent while Julian humiliated us at supper. I know. You relied on my skill when your chair failed. I know. You used my judgment when the mill was in danger." He lowered his eyes. "And when believing me carried a public cost, you returned authority to the man I had warned you about. I was wrong. That is an assessment, not a repair." Elias accepted the distinction. "What repair do you require? Do not ask me to design your apology while I am defending myself." She placed one hand on the door. "I will obey the restriction you signed." His head lifted. "Clara." "No. You cannot grant me authority in private and withdraw it whenever another man questions my motives. I will revoke it. Not tonight." She closed her fingers around the edge of the door. "Tonight. You will live with the decision long enough to understand what it cost." Elias did not block her. He moved his chair back and allowed the door to close. Clara waited until his wheels faded along the corridor. Then she opened the master gauge book again and compared the pressure mark with an old consortium invoice from the records room. The crowned stag aligned perfectly. Julian had copied her private design before the accusation. The planted pin was not merely false evidence. It proved he possessed knowledge he could not explain. Clara did not sleep. Before sunrise, she copied the pressure mark from the master gauge book onto plain paper, sealed the original inside the hidden base of her drafting case, and wrote the time across the seal. She kept the copied impression inside her sleeve. The master book remained, the stronger proof, but only if Julian continued believing he had found every drawing that mattered. At 7, the western reservoir bell rang once. A second strike followed before the first vibration had faded. Clara opened her door. Workers were already running across the lower courtyard toward the waterworks road. Mrs. Hale stood beside the staircase with both hands pressed to her apron. The gate moved during the morning test. How far, no one will say. Clara headed toward the entrance. A constable employed by the estate blocked the door. Mr. Harcourt ordered that you remain inside until the trustees arrive. Clara removed Elias's signed restriction from her pocket. This order requires an estate officer to accompany me. It does not authorize you to leave. It restricts access to machinery rooms. She held the document where he could read it. It does not imprison the Duchess of Harcourt in her own house. The constable hesitated. Clara stepped past him before he decided whether Julian's authority extended that far. Elias waited outside in his repaired chair. The secondary brake Clara had built remained fixed beside his left hand. 2 footmen stood behind him, but neither touched the handles. I revoked the restriction, he said. He held out a new order bearing his seal and the signatures of Sir Malcolm Avery and another trustee. Clara, read it. The document restored her access to every Harcourt workshop, ledger, gatehouse, and machinery store. It also appointed her temporary technical advisor during the reservoir emergency. You persuaded 2 trustees before breakfast. I showed them the repair invoices and admitted why you were denied access. Did you tell them you agreed to it? Yes. Did you tell them I warned you? Yes. Clara folded the order. That is a beginning. Elias did not ask for more. They travelled toward the reservoir in separate carriages because Clara needed room for tools, timber gauges, chain, and the portable vise. The road climbed above the valley through wet fields and rows of workers' cottages. Children stood outside in nightclothes, watching men run uphill with shovels and ropes. No evacuation bell had sounded. Julian did not want the valley frightened before the trustees judged Elias incapable. Clara looked toward the dark line of water above the western wall. A controlled pressure test should never have been visible from the cottages. Today, water pulsed through the overflow channel in irregular bursts. The western gate was moving when Clara entered the turbine hall. Its iron control rod trembled beneath the strain. Each vibration travelled through the floor and returned with a deeper metallic knock. Sloane stood beside the main wheel, directing workers to tighten the stone braces around the gate frame. Julian watched from the raised gallery with 3 trustees and a physician. The foundation has shifted, Sloane announced. We must relieve pressure by opening the eastern channel. Clara crossed to the inspection rail. The stone frame showed no fresh cracks. Mortar dust remained undisturbed along the lower joints. The movement came from inside the locking assembly. How far did the western gate slip? She asked. Sloane ignored her. Elias entered behind the work crew. The Duchess asked a question. Sloane looked toward Julian before answering. 3 inches. When? During the first pressure increase, how many locking pins are engaged? All 6. Clara placed one hand against the control rod. The vibration struck at equal intervals. If the foundation were shifting, the movement would have varied, as stone settled under changing pressure. This rhythm followed the rotation of the gate wheel. One pin was failing each time the load reached the same point. "Stop tightening the braces," she ordered. Sloane laughed once. "The wall carries thousands of tons of water, and you are forcing the gate frame out of alignment while the lock is already slipping." The workers looked between them. Julian descended from the gallery. "You have no engineering degree recognized by this board. I have 12 years of work recognized by machines that remained standing." Clara opened her tool roll, removed the inspection cover from the western lock. Sloane placed himself in front of it. "No one opens that housing under pressure. Then reduce the pressure. The eastern channel must be opened first." Clara looked through the turbine hall windows. The eastern channel discharged toward the lower mill race. Opening it fully without warning would flood the dye works and trap the night crew still clearing the basement stores. Julian knew that. The resulting damage would be blamed on Elias's poor management before anyone examined the western gate. Clara turned to the trustees. "Who advanced this test?" Sir Malcolm frowned. "It was scheduled for tomorrow." Julian answered before Sloane could. "Conditions required immediate action." "What conditions?" The Duke's refusal to approve the consortium's emergency repairs. Elias moved beside Clara. "I refused an invoice that described parts never delivered." Julian's expression sharpened. "You refused because your wife encouraged suspicion." "No." Elias's voice carried across the hall. "I refused because I had surrendered too much judgment to you. And you profited from every failure that followed." The workers became still. This was the first time Elias had challenged Julian where the estate could hear him. Clara stepped to the inspection housing. If the foundation moved, the frame must be stabilized. She touched the steel cover. If the pins were reduced below tolerance, every increase in pressure makes the next failure more likely. Sloane shook his head. "You cannot know their dimensions without opening the lock. I measured 4 unused pins from your cabinet. That proves nothing about those installed. It proves someone ordered unsafe components." She looked at Julian. "And someone billed the estate for replacements that could not have arrived on the recorded dates." Julian faced the trustees. "This is precisely why temporary control must pass to a competent administrator." A violent crack interrupted him. The western gate slipped another inch. Water struck the channel below with enough force to shake dust from the rafters. One worker ran toward the emergency brake. Clara caught his sleeve. "Not yet. If we do nothing, the gate opens. If you engage that brake while the locking shoulders are misaligned, the force will shear all 6 pins at once." She knelt beside the control shaft and pressed a strip of soft lead against the exposed edge of the locking collar. The imprint showed a narrow crescent rather than a full circular contact. The shoulder was carrying pressure on less than half its intended surface. Clara held the lead strip beneath the lamp. "The gate is not resting against 6 locks." She pointed to the crescent. "It is balancing on the thinnest edges of them." Sir Malcolm descended from the gallery. "How long do we have?" Clara listened to 3 rotations of the wheel. The interval between impacts had shortened. At the present pressure, perhaps 2 hours. Julian looked toward Sloane. "That is speculation." Clara removed the copied impression from her sleeve. "This is the altered shoulder profile used in the Duke's chair." She placed the lead imprint beside it. The curves matched. The same change was made inside this gate. Elias studied both marks. "Can it be repaired?" Yes, but not by replacing one pin while the others carry the full load. What do you require? Evacuate the western cottages and clear both mills below the spillway. Julian stepped forward. An evacuation will destroy confidence in Harcourt and cost thousands. A failed gate will destroy Harcourt, Clara continued before he could interrupt. I need the eastern channel opened 1/4. No more. The dye works must receive 10 minutes warning. I need timber supports beneath the control rod. 2 intact pins from the original stores. And every worker who understands the manual gate chain. Sloane crossed his arms. There are no original pins left. Thomas Reed appeared at the turbine hall entrance. The apprentice's father stood behind him, carrying a long wooden box. Thomas looked terrified, but he did not retreat. My father kept 2, he said. Mr. Sloane ordered them melted. But father hid them when he saw the shoulders had been cut differently. Julian stared at the boy. Clara moved between them before he could speak. Elias addressed the gathered workers. Thomas Reed and his family are under my direct protection. Then he turned to Clara. You have command of the gate operation. Julian's face went pale. You cannot transfer estate authority to an accused woman during an emergency. Elias held his gaze. I am not transferring my judgment. He looked toward Clara. I am finally using it. Clara opened the wooden box. 2 heavy locking pins rested inside, blackened with age but unfiled. She fitted her portable gauge over the first shoulder. The measurement was exact. Then the turbine wheel struck again. A second locking pin had begun to fail. Clara looked at the clock above the gallery. The trustees' hearing would begin in 90 minutes, unless she stabilized the gate first. Julian would enter that hearing with a flooded valley as his strongest evidence. Clara divided the turbine hall into 3 working zones and placed 1 trusted foreman over each. The eastern crew opened the relief channel by a 1/4 turn, while messengers rode toward the dye works and western cottages. The central crew built timber supports beneath the control rod. Thomas and his father cleaned the 2 original locking pins without touching their measured shoulders. Elias remained beside the main wheel and repeated Clara's orders whenever Sloane tried to confuse the men. The first release of water struck the eastern channel with a roar. Clara watched the pressure needle fall, then stop above the mark she needed. Hold it there. Sloane reached for the wheel. The channel can take more. The people below cannot. He withdrew his hand only when Elias moved his chair between Sloane and the controls. Clara fitted a chain around the western control rod and transferred part of the load to the timber frame. Every turn tightened the links and reduced the violent movement beneath the inspection housing. The temporary structure groaned. The gate held. Remove the upper pin. Clara ordered. Thomas's father drove out the weakened component with a steel punch. Its shoulder had been filed almost flat. The cut matched the chair pin and the unused parts from Sloane's cabinet. Clara sealed it inside a numbered canvas packet before installing the first original replacement. The new shoulder seated against the lock with a deep, clean sound. For the first time since Clara entered the hall, the control rod completed a rotation without striking the frame. A cheer began among the workers. Clara raised one hand. We have replaced 1 of 6. The room became quiet again. They repeated the operation on the second lock. The timber supports bent as pressure shifted. 1 brace split near its base. Elias saw the fracture before the crew did. Clear the center. His warning gave the men enough time to step away before the brace snapped. The chain dropped 6 inches and caught against the secondary beam. Clara ordered a replacement support, then looked at Elias. You noticed the grain opening. You showed me where to watch. He had not claimed instinct or authority. He had credited instruction. Clara gave the next order. For 70 minutes. They reduced pressure, supported the rod, and exchanged each altered component. The last filed pin came free 13 minutes before the trustees' hearing was scheduled to begin. Clara installed the final original pin and signalled the eastern crew to close the relief channel by degrees. The western gate accepted the returning pressure without slipping. The control wheel stopped trembling. Below the reservoir, the evacuation bell continued ringing. But no flood entered the valley. Sir Malcolm stood beside the 6 sealed packets. You were correct about every pin. I was correct about the failure, Clara said. The person responsible still expects the hearing to remove the Duke before we can prove how the parts reached this gate. Julian had disappeared from the turbine hall during the final repair. So had Sloane. Elias ordered the constables to secure the workshop, records room, and consortium office. A messenger returned 20 minutes later. Sloane's room had been emptied. Several account books were missing. Julian's carriage had been seen travelling toward the railway road. Sir Malcolm looked toward the clock. We should postpone the hearing. No, Clara said. Postponement gives him time to destroy what remains. Elias studied her face. You have a plan. I have the original gauge book and the pin from your chair. That may prove the components were altered. It also proves Julian copied a design he should never have seen. She looked toward the open doors, where the road divided between Harcourt Hall and the railway station, but I will not present it today. Sir Malcolm frowned. Why not? Because I am still an accused woman whose husband restricted her access after evidence appeared in her room. Clara removed Elias's written order from her pocket. If I enter that hearing beside him now, Julian will say I repaired the gate to secure my place inside the marriage. Elias understood before the trustee did. You are leaving. My Edinburgh train departs this afternoon. The words changed the air between them. He did not ask whether she meant to return. He ordered her carriage prepared. At Harcourt Hall, Clara changed from her work dress, washed the oil from her hands, and packed only what she had brought into the marriage. The drafting case remained beside her. The sealed evidence travelled separately with Sir Malcolm. Elias waited in the front hall holding 3 documents. The first revoked every restriction placed on Clara. The second recognised Bennett Mobility Works, the master gauge book, and all future designs as her separate property. The third granted her the right to live and work independently without financial penalty or interference from Harcourt. Clara read each page. You prepared these while I packed. I should have prepared them before the wedding. He placed the pen on the table and signed before she asked. I was silent when Julian humiliated you because I feared defending myself through you would make me appear weak. Clara waited. I restricted your authority because I valued the trustees' comfort above your standing. He continued without softening the words. I accepted your labour when it protected me, then questioned your motives when believing you threatened my position. That is what you did. I cannot ask you to trust an apology I have not yet made public. No, I can make certain that leaving costs you nothing. Clara examined the final signature. You still need my evidence. Yes. The estate still needs my designs. Yes. And you are letting me take both. They belong to you. His voice remained steady, though his fingers tightened against the wheel. I will not turn need into another claim upon you. Clara placed the documents inside her case. For one dangerous moment, she wanted to reward him for finally doing what justice required. She refused to confuse a first repair with a completed transformation. My train leaves in 40 minutes. I know. At the station, Elias remained on the platform while the porter loaded Clara's luggage. He did not follow her into the carriage. He did not remind her of the workers, the hearing, or the marriage. Clara stood at the open door. What will you tell the trustees that the gate was sabotaged? Without the gauge book. Julian will call the file dimensions an emergency modification. I know. He will say I fled because I was guilty. I know. Elias looked up at her. And I will say that you left because I gave you reason to protect your freedom from this house. The station bell rang. Clara entered the carriage. Elias moved back from the platform edge. Only after the door closed did a rider appear at the far end of the station road. Thomas urged the exhausted horse toward them and shouted before he dismounted. Mister. Sloane took the inspection sheet. Clara lowered the window. What happened? He brought it to the Turbine Hall office. But Mr. Julian burned it before the trustees arrived. Elias turned toward Thomas. Did you see the fire? Yes. Your Grace. He said the Duchess had destroyed her own false measurements. Clara felt no panic. Julian had burned the document he believed contained her only comparison between the chair and gate pins. He had acted before learning that the visible sheet was merely a working copy. Thomas reached inside his coat. I found this beneath the office grate. He held out a scorched strip of consortium stationery. A traced outline remained visible across it. The copy design included Clara's hidden relief channel. Julian had preserved the impossible knowledge while trying to destroy the evidence. The conductor called for the doors to close. Elias did not ask Clara to step down. The train is still your choice, he said. Clara looked at the signed protections inside her case. Edinburgh remained real, useful, and safe. Then she looked toward the valley, where 400 families had returned to homes protected by repairs Julian would soon claim were unnecessary. Clara handed her ticket to the conductor. Send my luggage to Edinburgh. She stepped onto the platform with the master gauge book beneath her arm. I am returning for the hearing. Not for the marriage. Elias moved aside and left the path open. I understand. When they reached the Turbine Hall, Julian stood before the assembled trustees holding Clara's broken tool case. He smiled as she entered. The accused mechanic has returned. Clara placed her drafting case on the central table. No, she said. The engineer has. Every trustee turned toward Clara as she crossed the Turbine Hall. Julian stood behind the central table with her broken tool case open before him. The planted floodgate pin rested beside 3 affidavits and the scorched remains of an inspection sheet. You departed, Harcourt, after your sabotage was discovered, he said. Then you returned when you realized the Duke could not defend your scheme without you. Clara placed her drafting case on the opposite side of the table. I returned because you advanced the pressure test and endangered the valley. Julian looked toward the trustees. She admits abandoning her husband during an emergency. I left after the gate had been stabilized. The cottages evacuated, and the Duke's authority restored. Clara removed the 3 signed documents Elias had given her. I also left with independent employment, protected property, and no financial reason to return. Sir Malcolm read the Edinburgh offer first. The other trustees examined the deed, recognizing Clara's separate ownership of Bennett Mobility Works. Julian's accusation had required a woman desperate to possess Harcourt. The papers proved she could leave it with more security than she had brought into the marriage. Clara looked toward the workers gathered along the gallery. The question is not why I returned. The question is why Mr. Harcourt needed me gone before this hearing began. Julian's smile did not change. Because you were found with a sabotaged component. You found a component inside a case you controlled before any independent witness saw it. Mrs. Hale stepped forward when Sir Malcolm called her name. She confirmed that the case had been closed when she entered Clara's room. She had noticed only a shallow mark beside the clasp. Sloane had ordered her away before opening it. The night steward then confirmed that Julian had removed the sealed packets from his safe without a second witness. Only after Julian handled them did one packet disappear. Sir Malcolm turned toward him. You told us the packet was already missing. I repeated what the steward reported. The steward shook his head. I reported 4 packets before you entered the safe. Sir. Julian looked at the man with quiet contempt. A servant's memory changes quickly when his employer is present. Clara did not ask the room to choose between them. She lifted the planted pin with metal tongs and placed it beside the 6 components removed from the western gate. The planted pin was polished before it entered my case. The gate pins were coated with months of oil and mineral residue. She rotated each component beneath the lamp. The filing angles are similar, but the surfaces are not. Julian folded his arms. You taught the workers how to imitate your own work. Then I must also have taught them to travel backward through time. Clara opened the floodgate ledger to the first false invoice. This bill describes the same locking groove found on the planted pin. It was dated 5 weeks before my marriage. Sir Malcolm examined the page. Julian answered without hesitation. Your design was already known to the consortium, which designed the Bennett locking shoulder with the relief channel. The hall fell silent. Clara did not open her drafting case. She allowed Julian's words to remain where everyone could hear them. Sir Malcolm looked from him to her. Is that the feature shown on the invoice? No. Clara said. The invoice calls it an improved retaining groove. I have not yet shown this board that the relief channel exists. Julian's expression tightened. You described it during the gate repair. I described an altered shoulder. She placed the scorched strip recovered by Thomas beside the ledger. I never mentioned the hidden channel in this hall. At the mill, or inside Harcourt. Julian looked towards Sloane, who stood beneath the gallery with 2 constables beside him. Sloane had been caught at the railway road before noon, with account books hidden beneath his carriage seat. His return had removed Julian's safest escape route. Clara continued. The relief channel appeared in one private drawing. It was never patented. Sold? Or sent to Edinburgh. Someone traced it from my master book in the library. She displayed the impression, copied from the page. The faint outline of a crowned stag crossed the design. Then she placed Julian's consortium stationery beneath it. The crest aligned with the compressed mark. You rested this paper over my book while I tested the Duke's repaired chair. Julian gave a dismissive laugh. A blurred impression proves nothing. Alorne. It would not. Clara turned to Thomas. The apprentice described the wooden pattern Sloane had given him and the order to reduce 6 gate-pin shoulders. He named the vice, file, and locked room he had used. He also described the crowned stag drawn on the reverse side of the pattern. Julian stepped toward him. The boy is protecting his father from theft charges. Elias moved his chair into the space between them. You will address the witness through the trustees. Julian stopped. Clara did not thank Elias or surrender the questioning to him. She asked Thomas whether the pattern included a narrow cut behind the shoulder. The boy nodded. Mr. Sloane said it allowed the pin to settle. It did the opposite. Clara lifted one of the removed gate pins. The channel concentrated pressure at the thinnest point. Each rotation weakened the shoulder until the lock slipped. Sir Malcolm examined the cut. Could the failure have occurred naturally, not in 6 components with identical dimensions? Clara placed her portable master gauge over the first gate pin. The altered shoulder passed through an opening designed to reject any safe component. She tested the chair pin. It passed through the same opening. Then she fitted the planted pin from her tool case. It stopped before reaching the narrowest point. Julian leaned forward. That proves your own evidence is inconsistent. It proves the planted pin was made to resemble the sabotage by sight. Clara rotated it beneath the lamp. But whoever copied my drawing misunderstood its purpose. The genuine altered components were reduced after forging. The pin placed inside my case was cast from a traced profile. A casting leaves softened edges where a file leaves directional lines. Sloane closed his eyes. Julian remained still. Clara placed the 3 pins in a row. One was taken from the Duke's chair. One nearly opened the reservoir above 400 families. One was manufactured to place blame in my room. The first 2 share a tool method, workshop, residue, and payment chain. The third shares only the secret drawing stolen by Julian Harcourt. A trustee near the gallery opened one of the recovered account books. He found payments from the estate to Julian's consortium for 24 certified pins. The workshop inventory recorded 12 deliveries. Only 6 had been installed. 4 unsafe pins had remained in the cabinet. The final 2 had never existed outside the invoices. Julian had billed Harcourt repeatedly for parts. His own men weakened, removed, and replaced. Each failure created another payment. Each crisis increased his argument that Elias could no longer govern. Sir Malcolm looked toward Sloane. Who ordered the alterations? Sloane stared at Julian. Julian spoke before he could answer. The engineer acted to preserve a failing estate. Clara heard the mistake immediately. No one had yet accused Julian of knowing why Sloane changed the pins. She stepped closer to the table. You said the alterations were necessary. They were emergency adjustments. Then you admit, knowing they were made. I know what any trustee would know. Clara opened the gate inspection schedule. The official reports describe every installed pin as full measure. If you knew the shoulders had been reduced, you approved false safety records. Julian looked toward the main doors. 2 constables moved into his path. He turned back to Clara. You have measurements, frightened workers, and a damaged chair. You do not have proof that I ordered a single act. Clara rested one hand on the locked drafting case. That is the final question. She looked toward the 5 trustees, the contractors, the servants, and the workers who had once watched men take credit for her repair. Did Julian merely profit from accidents? Or did he design failures that would place Harcourt under his control? She released the hidden catch beneath the handle. The false base opened. Clara lifted out the Bennett master gauge book and placed it before the room. Julian's composure broke for the first time. That book should have burned with the inspection sheet. No one moved. Clara kept her hand on the cover. I never told you where the inspection sheet was destroyed. Julian's final sentence settled over the turbine hall more heavily than the reservoir above it. Sir Malcolm looked at the scorched paper, then at the unopened masterbook beneath Clara's hand. You believed both documents had been destroyed, he said. Julian recovered too late. I assumed the Duchess kept them together. Clara opened the book to the page containing the unreleased relief channel. The inspection sheet never contained this complete design. She placed the scorched strip over the page without allowing it to touch the original. The sheet you burned was a working comparison prepared after I discovered the altered pins. The only document showing this hidden correction was the book you traced in the library. Julian pointed toward Elias. The Duke gave me access to every room in his house. Access does not explain why you copied a private design and ordered it cast into evidence found inside my chamber. Clara turned to the recovered consortium accounts. It does not explain why your company billed for safe forged parts while delivering weaker cast replacements. It does not explain why every chair failure prevented Elias from attending a meeting where those payments might have been questioned. She placed 4 dated letters beside the invoices. Each letter summoned Elias to inspect an expense. Each corresponding repair report recorded a wheelchair failure within 24 hours. Sir Malcolm read the dates aloud. The pattern no longer resembled misfortune. It resembled scheduling. Sloane stepped away from Julian. I filed what I was ordered to file. Julian turned on him. You approved every measurement. Because you threatened to accuse me of stealing from the workshop. Sloane's voice broke as the constables moved closer. You said the Duke would be removed before anyone examined the old parts. Julian laughed without humour. A frightened man will say anything. Clara closed the master gauge book. Then we will not rely upon fear. She asked Thomas's father to bring forward the wooden box that had held the 2 original pins. A folded delivery receipt remained beneath the lining. The receipt bore Sloane's signature, Julian's consortium seal, and a notation ordering the original components removed for melting. The date fell 3 days before the first false replacement invoice. Sir Malcolm compared the paper with the consortium ledger. The serial numbers matched parts the estate had supposedly purchased twice. Julian had not merely hidden poor work. He had removed safe components, weakened their replacements, and charged Harcourt each time the manufactured failure required another repair. The trustees withdrew to the gallery for less than 10 minutes. When they returned, Sir Malcolm spoke for the board. Julian's trusteeship was suspended immediately. Every consortium account connected to Harcourt would be frozen pending an independent audit. The recovered ledgers, altered pins, letters, witness statements, and Clara's authenticated book would be delivered to the county authorities. Sloane would remain in custody while his cooperation was evaluated. Julian looked toward Elias. You would destroy your own family on the word of a woman who was prepared to leave you. Elias guided his chair into the center of the hall. She was prepared to leave because I failed to deserve her trust. His voice carried to the same guests. Servants, contractors, and workers who had heard Julian's wedding toast. Ate my supper. Julian called Clara the wife of half a husband. I remained silent because I feared that defending myself would make me appear dependent. My silence allowed him to degrade both of us. Elias looked directly at Clara. Later, when she gave me evidence, restored my independence, and protected my workers, I accepted her skill in private. When believing her required public courage, I restricted her authority and placed my name beneath that injury. He turned toward the trustees. Those decisions were mine. My accident did not make them for me. Julian's manipulation does not excuse them. Clara did not rescue him from the confession. She allowed every word to stand where the harm had been public. Elias continued. Clara Bennett discovered the sabotage. She preserved the evidence. She identified the gate failure. She directed the repair. She returned by choice after I had signed her freedom to leave. No title of mine created her authority. Harcourt survived because we finally recognized the authority she already possessed. No one applauded immediately. The silence was better than applause. It meant the room was measuring Clara by a new standard and finding the old one indefensible. So Malcolm asked her to explain what the estate required next. Clara moved to the turbine controls. The western gate is stable, not restored. All 6 locks must be replaced with independently tested steel components. The cottages need a permanent evacuation plan. The workers need authority to report defects without passing through the contractor accused of creating them. The accounts require inspection by someone who does not profit from emergency repairs. A mill foreman raised his voice from the gallery. And who will have final authority when a trustee wants the machinery kept running? Clara looked toward Elias. He placed a prepared charter on the table. You will, he told the foreman. The document established a worker-elected safety committee with direct access to the estate records. It also created the independent office of Director of Harcourt Mechanical Works and Water Safety. The director controlled the repair budget, contractor appointments, inspection, emergency shutdowns, and publication of safety reports. The salary came from the estate trust rather than the Duke's household. Every Bennett design remained Clara's property. Her authority survived separation, resignation, or the end of the marriage. Elias signed the charter before the trustees. Then he moved the document toward Clara without placing a pen in her hand. The office is yours if its conditions are sufficient. Clara read every clause. They are not. Julian gave a bitter smile from beside the constables. Even now, he expected Elias to mistake resistance for disloyalty. Elias only asked, "What must change? The director may not be dismissed by the Duke alone." Agreed. Every safety order must enter the public estate record. Agreed. The committee must include 2 women from the mills and 1 tenant from the western cottages. Agreed. My professional name remains Clara Bennett. Elias met her eyes. Agreed. The trustees amended the charter in their own hands. Clara signed only after the final condition had been entered. The workers responded first. Thomas removed his cap. Then the foreman followed. The gesture moved through the turbine hall until even the contractors lowered their heads toward the woman they had treated as decoration 2 days earlier. Julian was taken from Harcourt before sunset. His frozen consortium assets were assigned to emergency repairs, lost wages, and compensation for families displaced during the evacuation. Sloane provided the locations of 2 hidden account books and accepted responsibility for carrying out the alterations. The western cottages remained dry. The mills reopened only after Clara's committee completed its first inspection. 3 days later, Clara stood inside the former consortium office. Workers were replacing the crowned stag above the door with a plain brass plate. It read, Clara Bennett, Director of Mechanical Works and Water Safety. Her luggage remained in Edinburgh. The position offered there remained hers for 6 months. Elias entered without a servant and stopped at the threshold. He had waited to be invited. I signed the final separation deed. He said, "You may take the Edinburgh appointment tomorrow, next month, or after the repair term ends. And if I leave, the charter remains. My patents remain yours. The marriage remains only if you choose it." Clara crossed the office and placed the repaired brass pin from his chair on the desk between them. On their wedding night, Elias had asked whether she believed he could satisfy her. He had believed the answer depended upon his body, his title, or her willingness to comfort him. Now he waited without demanding reassurance. Clara rested her hand beside his rather than beneath it. I never needed you to prove that you were still a man. His expression tightened with remembered shame. What did you need? A man who could hear no, correct the harm he caused, and leave the door open when he wanted me to stay. Elias looked toward the open doorway. I am learning. Yes, Clara said. You are. She told him she would remain at Harcourt for the 6-month repair term. She would keep the Edinburgh position available. They would live in separate rooms until trust, not duty, changed that arrangement. Elias accepted every condition without bargaining for affection. Only then did Clara lean forward and kiss him. He did not seize her wrist. He did not ask what the kiss promised. He allowed her to choose its beginning and its end. Outside the office, the new safety bell rang once across a valley that remained standing. If Clara's courage earned your respect, subscribe and join us for another story where a woman's quiet skill changes the fate of an entire house.